Melissa's colleagues at the marketing firm had often wondered if she was a machine. Her unparalleled work ethic, unrelenting passion, and unwavering commitment had earned her the reputation of being the hardest worker in the company. Her persistence and determination had finally paid off when she received a promotion, but it was not enough to keep her from feeling burnt out. As the hustle and bustle of the city began to take its toll on her, Melissa craved an escape to a place where she could find solace and rejuvenation. She decided to take her whole family to the island of Maui in Hawaii, a place known for its idyllic beaches and tranquil waters. The idea of exploring the stunning coastline and indulging in water activities was enough to invigorate her soul. Melissa's family was a diverse and dynamic group, with each member having their own unique traits and personalities. Her parents, who had retired after years of hard work, were a happy couple, enjoying the peace and serenity that life after work provided. Melissa's younger brother, on the other hand, was a self-proclaimed daredevil, always seeking new adventures and taking risks that most would avoid. Her younger sister was the baby of the family, looking up to Melissa as an inspiration and role model. She was eager to follow in her big sister's footsteps, always watching her every move and admiring her accomplishments with an air of awe and wonder. Despite their differences, the family loved and supported each other, ready to face any challenge that came their way. The island of Maui was a tropical haven that welcomed Melissa's family with open arms. The turquoise waters glimmered in the sunlight, and the white sandy beaches stretched for miles, inviting them to explore. The constant murmur of the waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing soundtrack to their adventures, while the soft sand tickled their toes. But beneath the idyllic scenery lay a world of danger, and it was only a matter of time before they would find themselves entangled in its grasp. As the sun began to set, Melissa and her family sat down at a beachside bar to enjoy a drink and soak up the island's ambiance. A friendly local overheard their conversation and offered a suggestion that would change their vacation forever. The local recommended that they explore the Molokini crater, a dormant undersea volcanic crater. Intrigued, Melissa and her family eagerly inquired for more details about the location. The local described it as a magnificent wonder of nature, with an abundance of marine life and underwater caves waiting to be explored. As the group imagined themselves diving into the clear blue water of the crater, they felt a sense of excitement and apprehension. They had never attempted anything like this before, and the unknown dangers lurking beneath the surface added to the thrill. The idea of venturing into a crater formed by a volcano that had been active in the past made their hearts race. Despite their hesitation, they decided to take the plunge and embark on this new adventure. On the day of the dive, the family was bubbling with excitement as they strapped on their diving gear and jumped into the cool, clear water surrounding Molokini crater. The vibrant colors of the coral reef below were mesmerizing, and the family couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder and awe at the otherworldly beauty before them. Schools of brightly colored fish swam around them, while majestic sea turtles glided gracefully by. The eerie silence of the underwater world only added to the sense of mystery and adventure that Melissa and her family felt. But as they delved deeper into the crater, a feeling of unease began to settle in the pit of their stomachs. However, while swimming, Melissa noticed a group of large shadows lurking in the murky waters. Curious, she used her underwater flashlight to shine a light on the shadows. Melissa was petrified to see a pack of tiger sharks stalking the murky waters. In a panic, Melissa swam to the surface and alerted her whole family. The family were in a frenzy, thrashing relentlessly with their efforts to reach the safety of the waiting boat. The chaos caught the attention of the sharks. The pack of sharks swam towards the commotion. Realizing that there's prey in the water, the predators went on a feeding frenzy. The rest of the family were almost upon the boat, but Melissa was not so lucky. In a matter of seconds, she was surrounded and circled around by a pack of hungry tiger sharks. Melissa could see the fins of 5 sharks circling around her. She tried to swim away as fast as she could, but the sharks were faster. Suddenly, one of the predators lunged at her, biting Melissa's left leg. Melissa screamed in agony as she felt the shark's razor-sharp teeth tear her flesh. The water around them was crimson red with Melissa's blood mixing with the salt water. The smell of the blood in the water crazed the other sharks, who were overcome with their primal instincts and hunger. The other sharks started attacking Melissa, who was helpless against the might of the predatory beast of the sea. As the first shark latched onto Melissa's leg, tossing her around like a rag doll in the water, one shark latched onto Melissa's arm. Suddenly, in a bone-crunching bite, both sharks bit off Melissa's limbs. Melissa couldn't even scream, as another shark bit off her head. The sharks continued their harrowing attack. Some sharks began ripping the other limbs, while one bit on Melissa's torso, dragging her mangled, lifeless body to the depths of the ocean. Melissa's family could only watch in horror as this pack of tiger sharks ripped her apart. The Coast Guard responded to the distress call of the guide, but it was no use. After several days of search, no part of Melissa was found. Her family was left with the emotional scar of watching their beloved Melissa devoured by the primal predators of the sea. Magdalene had always been a hard worker. She grew up in a small town in the Midwest, where her parents instilled in her the value of a strong work ethic. When she graduated from high school, she immediately started working at a local factory, putting in long hours and saving every penny she could. As she got older, Magdalene began to dream of something more. She wanted to travel the world, experience new cultures, and live life on her own terms. But she knew that in order to do that, she would need to save up a substantial amount of money. So she set her sights on a career in finance. She went back to school at night while working full-time during the day, and eventually earned a degree in accounting. With her new skills and knowledge, Magdalene landed a job at a large financial firm in the city. For the next 25 years, Magdalene dedicated herself to her job. She worked tirelessly, climbing the corporate ladder and earning promotions along the way. She saved as much money as she could, always keeping her eye on the prize of an early retirement. Despite her success in her career, Magdalene never lost sight of her dreams. She spent every spare moment planning and researching her future travels, making sure that she'd be able to experience everything she had ever wanted to see and do. Finally, at the age of 43, Magdalene decided it was time to retire. She had saved enough money to support herself for the rest of her life, and she was ready to start living her dream. Magdalene sold her house, bought a small RV, and set out on the road. Over the next few years, she traveled all over the United States, visiting national parks, historical landmarks, and small towns. She met new people, tried new foods, and saw things she had never imagined. As she traveled, Magdalene realized that she had made the right decision in retiring early. She was finally able to live the life she had always dreamed of, and she was grateful for every moment. One day, as Magdalene was driving along the coast, she came across a small beach town that caught her eye. It was a picturesque place with quaint little shops and cafes lining the streets and a long sandy beach stretching out in front of her. Magdalene knew she had to stop and explore. She parked the RV in a nearby campground and spent the next few days wandering around the town. She met some friendly locals who showed her their favorite spots, including a hidden cove that was only accessible at low tide. Magdalene spent hours sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore and feeling the sun on her face. As she walked through the town, Magdalene couldn't help but notice how relaxed everyone seemed. People strolled along the streets, stopping to chat with each other, or sit at outdoor tables and enjoy a coffee or a snack. There was a sense of peace and contentment in the air that was infectious. Magdalene found herself drawn to the idea of settling down in this little town. She had been on the road for years now, and while she loved the freedom and adventure of traveling, she was starting to feel a little bit lonely. She missed having a community of people around her, and she longed for a place to call home. After some thought, Magdalene decided to take the plunge. She found a small cottage for sale on a quiet street just a few blocks from the beach, and she decided to buy it. She spent the next few months fixing it up, adding her own personal touches and making it feel like home. Magdalene spent her days exploring the town and getting to know her neighbors. She went on long walks on the beach and learned how to drive a boat. One evening, Magdalene decided to take her small boat out to sea and spend the night sleeping on the waves. It was a clear night, with a full moon casting a soft glow over the water. She lay down in the boat and listened to the sound of the waves lapping against the side. As she drifted off to sleep to the sound of the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull of the boat, Magdalene was startled awake by a sudden jolt. The boat was rocking violently, and she could hear something thrashing in the water nearby. She sat up and peered over the side of the boat, trying to make out what was happening. That's when she saw it. A massive great white shark, easily 15 feet long, was attacking her boat. It had bitten into the side of the boat and was shaking it back and forth, trying to get Magdalene inside. Magdalene tried to stay calm, but her mind was racing. She had heard stories of sharks attacking boats before, and she didn't know what to do. She grabbed a nearby oar and began hitting the shark with all her might, hoping to scare it away. But the shark seemed undeterred, continuing to bite and shake the boat. Magdalene frantically searched for something else to use as a weapon. She remembered that she had a can of bear spray on board, but she wasn't sure if it would be enough to scare off a 15-foot predator. She quickly grabbed it and aimed it at the shark's face and sprayed, hoping to repel it with a strong scent. To her relief, the spray seemed to do the trick. The shark suddenly released the boat and swam away, disappearing into the darkness. Magdalene sat there for a few minutes, catching her breath and waiting to make sure the shark wasn't coming back. Magdalene breathed a sigh of relief as the shark swam away, but her relief was short-lived. Magdalene thought she was safe, but she was wrong. The shark had disappeared into the darkness, but it had not given up. It circled the boat and came back for a second attack. The shark reappeared, its massive jaws closing in on her arm. Magdalene screamed in terror as the shark clamped down on her arm, dragging her into the water. Pain shot through her body as the shark shook her violently, trying to tear her arm off. Magdalene's mind raced with fear and panic as she desperately fought back, hitting the shark with everything she could find. But the shark was too strong, and Magdalene's efforts seemed to only anger it more. Just when she thought all hope was lost, Magdalene spotted a nearby boat. With all her strength, she managed to break free from the shark's grip and swim towards the boat, yelling for help. The occupants of the boat quickly sprang into action, pulling Magdalene out of the water and taking her to shore. Her arm was badly injured, and she was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Magdalene spent the next few weeks in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. The attack had left her with deep wounds and extensive nerve damage in her arm, making it difficult to move or even hold things. She was devastated to learn that she might not ever fully regain the use of her arm. Despite the setback, Magdalene refused to give up on her dream of living in the beach town. She worked tirelessly to rehabilitate her arm, undergoing multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. Slowly but surely, she began to regain some movement in her arm, but it would never be the same. Magdalene's experience with a shark attack had left her with a newfound appreciation for life. She realized that every moment was precious and should be treasured. She decided to use her experience to inspire others, sharing her story and encouraging people to never give up on their dreams, no matter what obstacles they might face. In the end, Magdalene found that her dream of settling down in a small beach town had come true. Despite the hardships and challenges she had faced, she had found a community of people who welcomed her with open arms and helped her through her recovery. She continued to explore the town and surrounding areas, but now with a newfound appreciation for life and a deeper sense of gratitude for every moment. Randall had always been a daring soul, seeking out the most exhilarating adventures. The thrill of scaling mountains, gliding through the air, and even conquering the world's highest peak had all been accomplished. However, now he yearned for the heart-pounding excitement of undersea exploration. After much research, Randall chose Mossel Bay, a place renowned for its vast population of great white sharks, to try his hand at shark cage diving. The idea of being submerged in a steel cage, teetering precariously on the ocean's surface while the colossal predator swam around, both fascinated and terrified him. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, that could go one of two ways: an unforgettable thrill or a terrifying disaster. The journey to Mossel Bay was long, but when Randall arrived, he was struck by its immense beauty. The cerulean waters of the ocean shimmered under the sun's rays. The coastline was a picturesque panorama of rocky cliffs and sandy beaches. The tranquil town was small, but it was clear that this place held great power, with the possibility of danger lurking just below the water's surface. Randall's excitement grew as he boarded the boat and set out towards the diving location. The cage was ready and waiting for him, and he couldn't wait to be lowered into the water. As the cage sank into the depths of the ocean, Randall's anticipation turned to fear. The water was murky, and he couldn't see far beyond the steel cage. The silence was deafening, and the only sound was the rhythmic breathing of the diving crew. Suddenly, a group of great white sharks began to circle the cage, their teeth glistening in the murky water as they attacked the steel pegs. Randall could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he watched them, wondering if the cage could withstand their attack. But as the sharks continued to circle, the cage remained sturdy, and Randall felt confident that nothing bad could happen. As the minutes ticked by, the tension grew palpable as the sharks kept circling the cage, their razor-sharp teeth bared in a menacing display. Randall and the crew felt a sense of relief when the sharks eventually stopped attacking the cage, only for their relief to quickly turn to confusion as they suddenly disappeared without a trace. In the murky waters, a thick layer of foam and bubbles made it difficult to see anything. But in the depths, Randall caught a glimpse of something that made his heart race with fear. A massive figure was moving towards the cage with deadly precision. It was coming fast, and there was nowhere to hide. As it approached, the figure became clearer, revealing itself to be a colossal great white shark. Its massive body dwarfed all other sharks they had seen before. Its scarred sides bore the evidence of countless battles, and its cold, dead eyes were fixed on the steel cage with an unerring focus. The crew and Randall watched in terror as the shark kept circling the cage, getting closer and closer with each pass. The atmosphere was thick with fear as they waited for what would happen next. The suspenseful silence was shattered when the shark disappeared suddenly into the depths of the ocean, leaving them all gasping for air. With the sudden appearance of the colossal great white shark, the crew of the diving expedition was thrown into a frenzy of fear and panic. They knew that they had to act quickly to save Randall's life. Without hesitation, they pulled on the rope that would lift the steel cage back to the surface. As they hauled it up, Randall could feel his heart pounding in his chest, and his body was shaking with fear. Just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief, thinking he had made it out alive, the bottom of the cage was struck by a massive force. It felt like a powerful blow from a sledgehammer, and Randall was thrown off balance, his body jerking wildly in the water. He knew that something terrible was happening, and he could feel his fear growing with each passing moment. The sound of the impact was deafening, and Randall could feel his ears ringing. The water around him churned and frothed, and he knew that something was trying to break through the cage. His mind raced as he tried to imagine what kind of monster was capable of such a feat of strength. Randall's mind raced as he frantically scanned the murky waters, desperate to identify the source of the massive collision that had sent him hurtling out of the cage. Dread filled his heart as he suddenly realized that the colossal great white shark they had seen earlier was the culprit. Before he could even think of a way to defend himself, the beast launched itself like a torpedo, its razor-sharp teeth glistening in the water. In one swift and bone-chilling moment, the shark sunk its jaws into Randall's upper torso, tearing it away from his body with a violent snap. The sensation of excruciating pain mixed with utter terror as Randall felt his life slipping away in the jaws of the monstrous predator. The world around Randall seemed to vanish in an instant, as he found himself trapped inside the jaws of the great white shark. The darkness was absolute, and the only sound he could hear was the deafening crunch of the shark's razor-sharp teeth slicing through his flesh and bones. The pain was indescribable, as if every inch of his body was being ripped apart by 1,000 knives. His ribs were crushed under the pressure of the shark's jaws, and he knew in that moment that he was doomed. As the shark clenched its massive jaws on Randall's body, his lifeless form hung limply in the water, at the mercy of the animal's frenzied movements. With each violent thrash, the water churned with an ominous blend of swirling crimson and murky green. The shark's razor-sharp teeth shredded Randall's flesh, creating a gory, macabre display in the water. The predator's movements were so powerful that it dragged Randall's mangled remains down into the dark, abyssal depths of the ocean, far from the safety of the surface. It was a gruesome and unsettling sight, a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk beneath the waves. The attack was so sudden that the diving crew was not able to react accordingly. Randall's body was never found, and the story of the attack sent fear and terror to the diving community. It was a reminder that nature was unforgiving, and even the bravest and most experienced of thrill seekers were not immune to its dangers. Francis has seen it all: the stunning views of the San Francisco Bay Area, the captivating skyline of San Francisco, and the eerie sight of Alcatraz Island looming in the middle of the water. He had been a boat operator for the Alcatraz Island tours for a decade now, and yet he never got tired of the sight of the bay and the island. The day had started like any other. Francis had picked up a group of tourists from San Francisco Bay and brought them to Alcatraz Island for the prison tour. After the tour was over, Francis was waiting for the tourists to return so he could take them back to the bay. But something caught his eye. The calm waters around the island seemed to call out to him, and without any particular reason, he decided to take the boat for a trip around the island. The situation turned dire when the vessel's engine suddenly faltered, refusing to restart. Left stranded in the frigid waters near the island, Francis attempted to call for assistance, but was informed that it could be a considerable amount of time before a tugboat would arrive to aid him. With no means of propulsion and an uncertain wait ahead, he found himself in a precarious predicament. As Francis sat there waiting for the tugboat to rescue him and his stranded vessel, he couldn't help but feel restless. Something was nagging at him, like a persistent itch that he couldn't scratch. Suddenly, he remembered the acrid scent of smoke that had filled his nostrils earlier, emanating from the engine room. His curiosity piqued, he made his way to the aft of the boat, gingerly leaning over the edge of the deck to peer into the mechanical abyss below. It was then in that vulnerable position that fate decided to strike its cruel hand. Before Francis could react, a monstrous figure emerged from the depths of the frigid waters surrounding the boat. It was a behemoth of the sea, a great white shark, with jaws wide open and rows of serrated teeth glistening in the sunlight. With ferocious speed, it lunged at Francis, sinking its teeth into his shoulder with a bone-crushing force. A blood-curdling scream escaped Francis's lips as searing pain shot through his body. He felt as if his flesh was being torn apart, the shark's teeth slicing through his skin like a hot knife through butter. Blood poured out from the wound, mingling with the salty waters of the San Francisco Bay, staining the once calm surface a deep crimson. Francis thrashed and writhed, desperately trying to free himself from the jaws of the predator. But the shark's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper into his shoulder with each thrash and pull. The excruciating pain was overwhelming, and Francis could feel his strength ebbing away, replaced by a numbing sensation as blood loss took its toll. As the water closed in around him, Francis realized he was in a fight for his life. He tried to fend off the shark with his free hand, desperately striking its sleek body, but it seemed impervious to his feeble attempts. The shark's thrashing movements only served to drag Francis further away from the safety of the boat, deeper into the icy waters of the bay. Francis felt a sense of hopelessness creeping over him. His body grew weak, and his vision blurred. He knew he was running out of time. But then, a surge of determination coursed through him, fueled by a primal instinct to survive. Summoning every ounce of strength he had, Francis reached out with his free hand and groped for the shark's eye. With a primal roar of pain and determination, Francis mustered every bit of strength he had to hold on to the shark's eye, feeling its squirming body thrash and writhe in agony beneath him. His grip was unrelenting, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of the predator's eye as he clung to life with every fiber of his being. The shark, shocked by the sudden attack, momentarily let go of Francis's shoulder, giving him the chance he needed to pull himself away from its razor-sharp teeth. Francis felt a searing pain rip through his flesh as he tore himself free, his shoulder and arm mangled beyond recognition. But he refused to give up even as the water around him turned crimson with his own blood. He knew that his only chance of survival was to fight back with everything he had. With a primal scream of defiance, Francis kicked the shark's nose with all his might, feeling the force of the impact reverberate through his entire body. The shark, stunned and in pain, swam away in a sudden burst of speed, disappearing into the murky depths. Francis was left floating in the water, bleeding and battered, but alive. He knew he couldn't make it back to the boat on his own, but he refused to give up. With a flicker of hope, he looked towards the horizon, desperately scanning for any signs of rescue. And then, like a beacon of hope, a tugboat appeared on the horizon, rushing towards him. It was the backup he had called for earlier. Francis felt a surge of relief and gratitude as he was pulled out of the water and onto the safety of the tugboat. He was whisked away to the hospital, where he received urgent medical attention for his severe injuries. Despite the devastating loss of his left shoulder, arm, and hand, Francis emerged from his encounter with a great white shark as a living testament to resilience and survival. His body bore the scars of the harrowing ordeal, a reminder of the ferocity of nature's predators. Bren was a thrill-seeker, an adrenaline junkie. He lived for the rush of excitement that came with each daring leap he took from the highest cliffs he could find. He was a cliff diver, and he had been diving since he was just a boy. Bren had traveled the world, diving from the cliffs of Greece, the mountains of Peru, and the beaches of Hawaii. But there was one place he had always dreamed of diving from, a place that was said to be the most dangerous cliff in the world. It was located in a remote part of Brazil, deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. The journey to the cliff was treacherous. Bren had to navigate through the thick jungle, avoiding deadly animals and poisonous plants. He had to cross raging rivers and climb steep mountains. It took him weeks to reach the cliff, but when he finally arrived, he knew it was worth the journey. The cliff was unlike any Bren had ever seen. It was over 200 feet tall, with jagged rocks jutting out from the sides. The water below was deep, dark blue, and Bren knew that it was filled with all kinds of dangerous creatures, from piranhas to anacondas. Despite the danger, Bren knew he had to dive from this cliff. He spent the next few days studying the cliff, measuring the height, the wind, and the water currents. He knew he had to time his dive perfectly if he wanted to survive. On the day of the dive, Bren woke up before sunrise. He ate a light breakfast and spent hours warming up his body, stretching and preparing for the jump. He knew that one mistake could mean death. As the sun began to rise, Bren climbed to the top of the cliff. He could feel his heart racing as he stood at the edge, looking down at the water below. He took a deep breath and jumped. The wind rushed past Bren as he plummeted towards the water. He felt weightless, free, alive. He could hear the roar of the water as he neared the surface, and he knew he had to be careful not to hit any rocks. At the last second, Bren twisted his body and entered the water at a perfect angle. He felt the shock of cold water as he plunged deep below the surface. He opened his eyes and saw the dark blue water around him, filled with all kinds of strange creatures. But Brenton wasn't afraid. He knew he was in his element. He swam to the surface and took a deep breath of air. He felt alive, more alive than he had ever felt before. He looked up at the cliff and felt a sense of pride. He had conquered the most dangerous cliff in the world. Over the next few weeks, Brenton dove from the cliff every day. He honed his skills, trying new dives and pushing himself to new limits. He even dove from the cliff at night, using only the light of the moon to guide him. But one day, something went wrong. Brenton climbed to the top of the cliff, took a deep breath, and leaped off into the air. As he soared through the sky, he felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. But as he descended towards the water, he saw something in the distance that made his heart skip a beat. A large shadow was moving in the water, and he realized with horror that it was a great white shark. Brenton tried to adjust his course and avoid the shark, but it was too late. The creature had sensed his presence and was swimming towards him with incredible speed. With only seconds to spare, Brenton braced himself for impact and hit the water hard. He felt the sharp pain shoot through his side and knew immediately that he had broken a rib. But the pain was nothing compared to the terror he felt as he saw the shark circling around him. It was a massive creature with razor-sharp teeth and a hunger in its eyes. He mustered all of his strength and swam towards the surface, trying to stay calm despite the pain in his side. The shark was relentless, though, and continued to circle around him, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Brenton knew he couldn't keep this up forever, and he needed to find a way out. He tried to swim away from the shark, but in the blink of an eye, the shark lunged towards him, and he swam headfirst into its mouth. The force of the bite caused significant trauma to Brenton's head and neck, and the shark's sharp teeth tore through his shoulders. Just when he thought all hope was lost, a group of dolphins appeared out of nowhere. They surrounded Brenton and chased off the shark with their powerful bodies and piercing calls. Brenton was in shock, but he knew he had been saved by these intelligent creatures. He climbed onto a nearby rock and collapsed, panting and clutching his bloodied shoulders. The dolphins swam around him for a few more moments before disappearing into the depths of the ocean. Brenton knew that he owed them his life and would never forget their bravery. Brenton then swam back to shore, bruised and battered, but alive. He knew that he'd been extremely lucky to still be alive despite being attacked by the great white shark, and he vowed to never take unnecessary risk again. But he also knew that the thrill of adventure would always be a part of his life, and he would continue to seek out new challenges and experiences. Even though he had been scared out of his wits, he knew that he wouldn't want it any other way. Ayumi stood in awe at the edge of the colossal aquarium, her eyes fixated on the crystal-clear waters that housed the awe-inspiring great white shark she had been observing for more than a year. The shark research facility in Japan was a marvel of modern science, a cutting-edge facility built to study and unravel the mysteries of these formidable apex predators. Ayumi herself was a respected figure in the world of shark research, known far and wide for her unwavering dedication and unparalleled passion in studying these enigmatic creatures. Her heart swelled with excitement as she prepared to embark on yet another day of unraveling the secrets of the deep, eager to immerse herself in the world of the great white shark once again. The facility was buzzing with activity as Ayumi prepared her daily observation session. She put on her diving gear, adjusted her goggles, and took a deep breath. The water was chilly as she descended into the aquarium, surrounded by the tranquil beauty of the underwater world. The great white shark, named Kuro, gracefully glided through the water, its sleek body a picture of power and grace. Ayumi had developed a special bond with Kuro during her time at the research facility. She had spent countless hours observing and documenting Kuro's behavior and had grown to respect and admire the creature's beauty and strength. But today, something was off. Kuro was behaving unusually. swimming faster than usual and bumping into walls of the aquarium with force. Ayumi furrowed her brow in concern as she observed Kuro's erratic behavior. She had never seen Kuro act like this before, and it sent a shiver down her spine. She decided to wrap up her observation and started making her way towards the surface. But before she could reach the top, Kuro suddenly changed direction and started circling her, its large black eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Ayumi's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the danger she was in. She tried to swim away from Kuro, but the shark was relentless in its pursuit. It circled closer and closer, its powerful body cutting through the water with alarming speed. Ayumi's mind raced as she desperately tried to come up with a plan to escape the shark's deadly jaws. Before Ayumi could react, it happened. In a heart-stopping moment, Kuro charged at her with astonishing speed, a blur of sleek muscle and razor-sharp teeth. Ayumi was caught off guard, unable to evade the massive predator in time. With a bone-crushing impact, Kuro slammed into her, pinning her against the unforgiving glass wall of the aquarium. Ayumi's head struck the glass, a sickening thud echoing through the air, and warm blood oozed down her face, mixing with the salt water. The metallic scent of blood seemed to trigger a primal instinct in Kuro, as the once graceful shark now transformed into a frenzied beast. Thrashing violently in the water, jaws snapping dangerously close, Kuro's eyes were filled with a predatory's madness as Ayumi found herself trapped and at the mercy of a creature she had spent her life studying. Desperation surged through Ayumi as she realized the gravity of her situation. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, she kicked and thrashed, desperately trying to free herself from Kuro's jaws. But the shark's immense power was overwhelming. She felt the sharp pain of teeth sinking into her flesh, tearing her limbs apart one by one. Blood clouded the water around her, staining it a murky red as Kuro tore into her with savage ferocity. Ayumi's screams were muffled by the water, her frantic movements fueled by sheer survival instinct. She fought with every ounce of strength she had left, her body writhing in agony as she refused to succumb to the relentless assault of the creature she had once studied, determined to cling to life until her very last breath. Amidst the chaos, one of the researchers caught wind of the commotion and immediately alerted the rest of the team. A rescue crew scrambled to the scene, but what they encountered left them paralyzed with shock. A ghastly scene before them was one of sheer horror. Ayumi's lifeless body bobbing in the water, her eyes frozen in a look of terror. Kuro was still in a frenzy, thrashing wildly and ripping chunks of flesh from Ayumi's body with a ferocity that defied belief. With a burst of speed, the shark launched itself out of the water and in one fluid motion devoured Ayumi's mangled remains in a gruesome display of savagery. The crew watched in disbelief and horror as the water swirled in a vortex of water, flesh, and blood. And just like that, Kuro disappeared into the depths, dragging Ayumi's tattered corpse behind it. After the initial shock of the attack, the rescue crew managed to gather themselves and quickly drain the aquarium water, revealing the grisly aftermath of Kuro's frenzy. Ayumi's once vibrant body had been brutally torn apart by the shark, and only her head remained, lifeless and rolling at the bottom of the tank. The scene was a gruesome sight to behold, one that left an indelible mark on the minds of all who witnessed it. The once bustling Shark Research Center now stood silent and empty, a solemn monument to the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Even Kuro, the culprit behind the attack, met a tragic end, his life cut short by the consequences of his deadly actions. Euthanized as a result of the attack, Kuro's fate was a stark reminder of the high stakes and risk involved in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. The loss of Ayumi, a dedicated and passionate shark researcher, left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of those who knew her. Her colleagues were haunted by the gruesome image of her body being torn apart by the very creature she had devoted her life to studying. A reminder of the savage nature of these apex predators. Pedro and Owen's friendship was unbreakable, fueled by their shared thirst for adventure. Owen was beyond thrilled when Pedro asked him to visit his hometown of Guadalupe Island in Mexico for an introduction to scuba diving. With Pedro as his mentor, Owen was confident he would make the most of his diving experience, even though he had never felt the rush of being underwater before. Pedro's expertise was reassuring, and Owen felt excited to take on the challenge. Guadalupe Island was a breathtaking place, a seemingly tranquil oasis surrounded by the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The water was so clear that it reflected the blue sky above like a mirror, revealing an underwater world full of wonder and danger. Beneath the surface, the coral reefs were a maze of colors, from bright greens to deep blues, dotted with exotic sea creatures that could take one's breath away. The currents were strong and unpredictable, and the waves crashed against the rocky shores with a thunderous force that could be heard from miles away. Owen was mesmerized by the beauty of the island, but he also felt a sense of unease in his gut, as if the ocean was warning him of the impending danger that lurked beneath the waves. Pedro, on the other hand, was filled with pride as he led his friend through the island's stunning landscapes, showing off the secrets and mysteries that only the locals knew. As the night fell on Guadalupe Island, Pedro and Owen joined the locals in a lively celebration. They drank, laughed, and listened to the island's music, feeling welcomed by the friendly community. However, as the drinks kept flowing, the locals began to share chilling stories of recent shark attacks on fishermen who dared venture too far from the shore. Owen's unease grew with each story, but Pedro seemed unfazed, assuring his friend that he knew these waters well and that sharks wouldn't be a problem. Yet the tales of terror lingered in Owen's mind, and the thought of facing these predators in the deep, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean filled him with dread. The following day, Pedro and Owen plunged into the vast ocean surrounding the island, their senses alive with the thrill of adventure. The vibrant underwater world was a feast for their eyes as they swam alongside colorful schools of fish and majestic sea turtles. The waters were so clear that they could see for miles, but the clarity also made it easier for Owen to spot something sinister lurking in the shadows. His heart racing, he saw two enormous great white sharks silently gliding towards them, their razor-sharp teeth glinting menacingly in the sunlight. Owen signaled Pedro frantically, pointing at the two great white sharks that glided with an ominous grace through the clear blue water. Pedro motioned for Owen to follow him, a confident smile on his face as he swam towards the creatures. Owen felt a chill run down his spine as he realized how close they were getting. Suddenly, the sharks seemed to sense their presence, and their behavior changed. They began to move in erratic patterns, as if agitated by the two divers invading their territory. With their heart racing and adrenaline pumping, Pedro and Owen tried to retreat as fast as they could from the agitated sharks. But it seemed like the predators had other plans in store. Suddenly, one of the sharks broke away from the group and charged towards Pedro like a missile, the force of the impact sending him spinning out of control. The sickening crack of bones echoed through the water as the shark slammed into Pedro's back, leaving him paralyzed and at the mercy of the ocean's currents. As the water swallowed him whole, Pedro's life hung in the balance. Pedro was helpless as the second shark made its move. Its mouth gaped wide open, and Owen could see the rows of jagged teeth as the shark charged towards Pedro. The shark lunged at Pedro with incredible speed, and Owen could hear the bone-crunching impact as it sunk its teeth deep into Pedro's shoulder. Blood gushed out from the wound as the first shark joined in, biting down on Pedro's leg with relentless force. The two beasts pulled in opposite directions, tearing through Pedro's flesh and bones like a pair of ferocious machines. The sound of snapping bones echoed through the water as the sharks ripped off Pedro's limbs, leaving behind a cloud of blood and dismembered body parts. Pedro's body convulsed in agony as the great white sharks mercilessly tore into his flesh. Piercing pain consumed him, and he realized his life was slipping away. He felt the cold embrace of the ocean as his body continued to freefall, the only sound the deafening roar of bubbles escaping his regulator. The water around him became a swirling vortex of red as the sharks ferociously ripped apart his body, leaving behind only scraps of torn flesh and blood-stained water. The scene of horror unfolded before Owen's eyes, and he was powerless to stop it. The two sharks were like monstrous predators, unrelenting and savage as they tore apart Pedro's body. Owen was rooted to the spot, frozen in terror at the sight of his friend's brutal demise. Eventually, he regained some semblance of control and began to swim away, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the shark's presence behind him, a dark and ominous force lurking in the depths of the ocean. Owen swam with all his might, trying to outrun the looming danger that pursued him. Owen was in shock, and he kept crying while informing the local islanders about the incident. The local authorities acted and tried to retrieve Pedro's remains, but to no avail. The only sign of the shark attacks was the crimson-tinged waters surrounding the area. Owen was traumatized by the events that unfolded before him, haunted by the memory of his friend being torn apart by the sharks. He vowed never to dive again and warned others of the dangers of underestimating the power of nature's creatures. Although the great white shark is often considered the most dangerous species of shark in the world, this is a misconception. While they are the most powerful species of shark, bull sharks are actually more dangerous as they are far more aggressive and more likely to attack humans when interacting with them. They have the tendency to stick to shallow coastal waters and can sometimes migrate up rivers when looking for new places to feed in. Bull sharks can be found all around the world, but the case that we're bringing to you today was noted in Sierra Leone, where Michelle Jones, a tourist, would learn the full potency of nature. Michelle was from North Carolina and had a job as a teacher. She lived in the same town all of her life and always wanted to travel the world. But the tight budget of a school teacher in the United States prevented that. Her husband Roger was a blue-collar worker and rarely had enough time for leisure. The pair lived their lives for many years before Michelle's husband announced that they were taking a trip. She was surprised, and Roger explained that he had won a bonus at his job, and they could use some of their savings to essentially go wherever they wanted to. Michelle was overjoyed by the news, and it took them a few days to agree on where they wanted to go. After some back and forth, they compromised on Sierra Leone, as they had heard amazing things about it. Sierra Leone had fantastic sights, and its beaches were ideal for tourists to lounge and relax from the stress of life. Their trip was booked in no time, and they had 2 weeks of relaxation ahead of them. They arrived in Sierra Leone on July 17, 1998, after a long flight with a few layovers, so they were quite exhausted and decided just to head to their accommodation and call it a day. The next few days were spent seeing the sights of the city, visiting museums, having drinks, and just enjoying everything the city had to offer. Near the end of the first week, the pair decided they would enjoy some time at the beach. After a day spent lounging around, they went back to their hotel and spotted a sign advertising a cruise from Freetown to Tenerife, which would last for the entire day. Since they were the type to jump at the chance for new experiences, they decided to go on the cruise. 2 days later, the cruise was set to start at 9 a.m., so Michelle and Roger got there 30 minutes early. There were 10 more people aside from them, and the tour guide was in high spirits and quite friendly, so the mood was good. They had never been on a cruise before, so they were excited for the day to come. The cruise took 2 hours to reach its initial destination, after which they would have some time to enjoy the sights and whatever they wanted to do. Then they had the trip back. The trip to Tenerife was relaxing and enjoyable, as the weather was on their side, and the guide's stories about Sierra Leone was quite enjoyable. Michelle and Roger spent their free time in Tenerife very similarly to their first few days in Freetown, so it was quite enjoyable. The trip back to Freetown was much the same, but something that made the boat slow down was a small shiver of sharks accumulating around a single point in the water, something you wouldn't see too often. The guide asked the pilot of the boat to slow down so everyone could get a better look. Upon closer inspection, they saw that there were 3 sharks feeding on something in the water, and they couldn't identify it on account of all the blood in the water. The tourists gathered on the boat's railing to see the shark, as the guide described it as a must-see event. They pressed on the railing, struggling to see over each other to take in as much of the scene as possible. Michelle and Roger were side by side and talking about how interesting the scene was. The sharks were ravenous and zipping through the water, absolutely tearing at whatever was in the water. At the peak of the feeding frenzy, the guide said that the boat would start up at that point to stay on schedule. The boat was turned on and started slowly moving forward, and the guide continued to explain what they would do upon returning to Freetown. However, the guide's words were drowned out of Michelle's ears as she hyper-focused on the squeaky railing getting progressively louder. It gave way. Within a moment, Michelle found herself splashing in the water in the middle of the shiver of sharks. The rest of the people on the boat barely managed to hold on to each other to not follow Michelle. Roger screamed after his wife and made an attempt to jump in after her, but the guide prevented him from doing that, since the shark would attack him as well, and they would have to save both of them. The moment she fell into the water, Michelle immediately felt the harsh, coarse skin of one of the sharks shred the skin on her back, making her yelp in pain. She flailed her arms in panic as she tried to get to the surface more securely. Normally, Michelle might have had a chance to swim to safety if it was a different shark species in the water with her. But these were bull sharks, and they were hungry. Just as Michelle made eye contact with Roger, she felt a searing pain in her lower thigh, which made her shriek and fall below the surface again. The shark took the move to take the first bite and was quickly out of the way to make way for the next mouth. The guide and the boat's pilot were trying to get the boat closer to Michelle, but it had already moved at least a dozen yards away. Roger was screaming at them to get the boat closer so he could pull his wife to safety, but it wasn't working out at all. Michelle felt another set of teeth clamp down on her ankle, pulling her under the water as a strong force knocked into her ribs, disorienting her. All at once, she felt a tremendous amount of pain as the third shark took hold of her right arm, tearing into it and releasing a red mist in the water around her. The pain was more than too much, so after expressing one final scream with the last of her breath, her consciousness started to fade. The last thing she remembered before waking up in the hospital was her husband's hands clutching her arms and pulling her up from the aquatic hell. According to Roger, Michelle was losing a large amount of blood, so the boat was rushing across the water as fast as it could, while the rest of the people on the boat helped tend to Michelle. The only reason Michelle is alive today is that among the group of tourists there was a single nurse, and the boat had a first aid kit and its essential equipment. Her wounds were bound and tourniquets were applied, but it wasn't much in the way of helping her survive for sure. Emergency services were called to the port, where the boat was supposed to dock, and 2 paramedics were ready by the time they got there. She was quickly taken to an ambulance, followed by her husband. After she was admitted to the emergency room, the doctors informed Roger that Michelle had lost nearly 35% of her blood, which was near the lethal point. But she would survive. It took a few days for her to stabilize before she could be seen, so Roger was more than relieved when he saw his wife was okay. Her injuries were debilitating as there was some nerve damage and loss of function, so she needed a good deal of physical therapy to be able to walk and use her arm properly. That took months, but she did pull through and was back to teaching after a few months of recovery. She said that what happened in Sierra Leone was tragic, but it was the way nature worked. She fell into the shark's plate, and they responded instinctively. She mentioned multiple times how much she appreciated her husband and the effort he put in to help her that day. Rising from the ocean with a majestic grace, Bird Rock stood tall like a natural colossus, its rough and jagged surface lending it an imposing air. The ocean currents crashed against its rocky facade, leaving behind a frothy white spray, which dissipated into the salty air. Surrounded by the cerulean expanse, the Bird Rock's rocky crags provided a sharp contrast, making it an awe-inspiring sight for all who laid eyes on it. For best friends Justin and Damien, Bird Rock was more than just a diving spot. It was their sanctuary, a world of vivid colors and untold mysteries that awaited them. As they swam deeper and deeper into the depths, the water slowly grew colder, and the reef came alive with a rainbow of colors. Fish in all shapes and sizes darted around them, and the sound of their breathing filled their ears. For them, the underwater world was their escape from the mundane, and they relished the chance to explore every nook and cranny. On a sunny day, the duo geared up with their diving gear, anticipation bubbling within them as they prepared to descend into the mysterious depths of the ocean. The water was crystal clear, revealing a stunning world beneath the surface. Justin and Damien exchanged excited glances, their eyes shining with the eagerness of explorers about to embark on a new adventure. With a splash, they submerged into the cool waters, the sensation of weightlessness enveloping them as they descended deeper into the abyss. The marine life greeted them with a mesmerizing display of colors, as if nature had painted a masterpiece just for them. Schools of fish danced around them, while corals swayed gracefully to an underwater symphony. As they swam further, Damien suddenly halted, his eyes widening in awe. Justin followed his gaze and gasped as he caught sight of a massive great white shark gliding towards them with stealthy grace. The shark's sleek body and rows of sharp teeth were a testament to its power and dominance in the underwater realm. Damien, an experienced diver, instinctively raised his dive knife, ready to defend himself. As Damien braced himself for a potential shark attack, he never expected it to happen so suddenly. In a flash of movement, the predator lunged at him with lightning speed, its razor-sharp teeth gnashing together with a deafening snap. Damien's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to dodge the beast's grip. But it was too late. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on his leg with a bone-crushing force, sending a wave of excruciating pain through his body. As the water around them churned and frothed, Justin watched in horror as his friend fought for his life. Damien's face contorted in agony as he desperately tried to break free from the shark's grip. But the predator's unyielding hold only tightened with each passing moment. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled bravery, Damien drew his knife and plunged it into the shark's scaly hide, hoping to weaken its resolve. But the predator was relentless, attacking again and again with a ferocity that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. As the struggle continued, the water around them turned crimson with Damien's blood, a macabre painting that seemed to mirror the violence unfolding before their eyes. Despite the pain and fear, Damien refused to give up, battling the shark with every ounce of strength he had left. But with each passing moment, his strength began to ebb, and the predator's grip began to tighten. In that moment, it seemed as though all hope was lost, and Damien's fate was sealed. Justin's heart pounded at his chest as he moved to intervene, but as if drawn by the scent of blood, another massive great white shark appeared out of nowhere. The two sharks circled Damien, their dark eyes fixed on their prey with an intensity that sent chills down Justin's spine. Damien fought with all his might, but the sharks were merciless in their attack. With a swift motion, one of the sharks lunged at Damien's torso, its serrated teeth tearing into his flesh. The water turned crimson as Damien's blood mixed with the salt water, creating a gruesome scene that played out in slow motion before Justin's eyes. He screamed, the sound muffled by the water as he watched in horror. unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding in front of him. The second shark joined in the attack, tearing into Damien from the other side, ripping his body apart with brutal force. Damien's screams were silenced as the sharks tore him apart like a rag doll, leaving only shreds of his wetsuit and a trail of blood in their wake. Justin's mind went blank, paralyzed with shock and horror at the sight of his best friend being devoured by two apex predators. He tried to reach Damien to save him, but the sharks were too fast, too furious, too ferocious. Justin's hands trembled, his entire body shaking with grief and helplessness. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he watched the gruesome spectacle unfold before him, unable to do anything to stop it. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the sharks finally retreated, leaving behind a trail of crimson in the water. Damien's lifeless body floated, disfigured and torn, a harrowing sight that Justin could never erase from his memory. The ocean that had once been a source of wonder and awe had turned into a nightmarish scene of carnage. In the shock and panic, Justin swam towards the shore with all his strength, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The image of Damien being ripped apart by the two sharks replayed in his mind like a horror movie on a loop, each detail etched into his soul with searing pain. He reached the shore, stumbling onto the sand, his body and mind in a state of turmoil. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Justin was emotionally scarred for life. He suffered from vivid nightmares, reliving the gruesome scene of Damien's death every night. The local news was flooded with the story of how two sharks ripped a diver into pieces in front of his friend, reminding everybody of the volatile nature and ferocity of the creatures of the sea.